Hi, my name is Corey Konieczka, and you're listening to Papstinenser.
Så er det igen blevet tid til at byde velkommen til Papstinenser, din podcast om brætspil. Din studievært er Christian Bak Petersen.
Velkommen til fjerde sæson af Papstinenser, en podcast om moderne bræt- og kortspil, præsenteret i samarbejde med papskov.dk, hvor du kan finde nyheder, anmeldelser, artikler og anbefalinger, alle sammen om brætspil. Mit navn er Christian Bak Petersen, og med mig i studiet i dag, der har jeg Peter Brix.
Hej.
Men folk, de skal ikke hænge på os så længe, Peter, vel? Fordi vi er her kun lige for at lave en lille intro.
Yeah.
Fordi i dag, der overlader vi mikrofonerne til vores producer Bo, som for et par uger siden fik sig lidt af et scoop, i det han tog en solid snak med i hvert fald en af Bos, ved jeg, favoritdesignere, nemlig amerikanske Corey, og nu prøver vi, Konieczka. Er det ikke meget godt ramt?
Det lyder meget godt. Altså,
det lyder meget godt.
Ja.
Vi har garanteret slagtet hans navn mere i tidligere episoder.
Jeg tror, jeg konsekvent har kaldt ham Konieczka.
Ved du hvad?
Så
jeg tænker, han bliver nok ikke fornærmet over noget af det.
Jeg tror, han har hørt det hele før.
Han har hørt det hele. Nå, men lige om lidt, så kan folk høre Bos interview med Corey, og jeg synes, det er blevet rigtig fedt. Og han virker som en rigtig fed fyr, og snakker gerne spil. Så det er som, de havde en rigtig fed snak. Og den glæder mig til at dele. Men det kan være, at vi lige skal vi lige tage en lige runde, hvad han for en designer han er, fordi du har alligevel haft fingrene i en del af hans designs.
Ja, det kan man sige. Altså, Corey har jo designet det, som der på en god dag er mit yndlingsspil, Battlestar Galactica. så allerede der har han jo en meget stor stjerne i min bog, og så har han jo været forbi hvis jeg skulle beskrive Corey, så er det i FFG's storhedstid deres stjernedesigner. Ja. Altså, det er ret meget følelsen, jeg får, ikke? Altså, Eldritch Horror, vi snakker Descent, vi snakker en anden af mine favoritter, Space Hulk Death Angel, The Card Game, tror jeg vist nok er den rigtige den konstellation af de ord. Så ja, altså Corey har på den måde været forbi rigtig mange spil, som jeg er rigtig glad for. Jeg synes, at jeg ved ikke, kan jeg ikke huske, jeg var jo selv ikke til stede den dag, I snakkede FFG for et års tid siden-agtigt. Men jeg har lidt følelsen af, at Corys exit fra FFG også måske lidt startede en downward spiral, er måske hårdt sagt, ikke? Men altså, der forsvandt lidt af
noget kreativt potentiale og noget brain trust.
Noget kreativt drive på en eller anden måde, ikke? Og så, altså hans navn står på rigtig, rigtig, rigtig mange spil, FFG har lavet. Jeg ved ikke, hvor meget af det, der reelt betyder, at han har været involveret, eller om han står på Imperial Assault og Doom og Gears of War, fordi at han har været med til at lave Descent, som de alle sammen bygger på, ikke? Det er sådan lidt iffy, hvordan det lige hænger sammen. Men han har i hvert fald været indblandet i mange rigtig dejlige spil.
Ja, og ja, præcis, har jo vel både været, var han ikke også, han var vel også inde over, står han ikke også på noget X-Wing, og han står på noget Star Wars Destiny også, og sådan noget, så det er jo nogen, altså, der har han i hvert fald, det er måske derfor, Bo han er så glad for ham.
Det kan godt være, man kan aldrig vide med ham, Bo.
Og så ved jeg også, at han har altså, han er jo gået solo, og har nu sit eget studie, og der fortalte du lige, inden vi gik på os, at der er hans første spil der, det er også det, at du lurer på.
Ja, så han har udgivet 2 spil på sit eget studie med et tredje på vej. Unexpected Games hedder det nye studie. Og specielt hans første spil, som hedder The Initiative, er jeg helt vild med efter at få prøvet. Det er sådan et du spiller børn, som spiller et spil, som måske i virkeligheden er noget med hemmelige agenter, der skal afkodes. Det er i hvert fald sådan noget med at løse gåder og knække koder og sådan noget. Og så er hele spillet er selvfølgelig et kampagnespil med en historie, man går igennem. Og det hele, så vidt jeg husker, både regelbogen og kampagnen er fortalt gennem en tegneserie. Men det der så, en af de ting, jeg synes lyder ret fantastisk, det er, at du kan ligesom regne ud, hvilket niveau vi er i spillet, om det, der sker på siden, foregår i den quote-unquote virkelige verden, eller om det foregår i det spil, de spiller, eller hvor det foregår henne, fordi at hvert niveau ligesom har designstreg i tegneserien, og det synes jeg lyder ret fantastisk. Altså, efter sigende skulle der være hints til, hvordan, hvad det hele handler om, bare ved at sidde og nærstudere bagsiden på spillet. Der er også en kode, du kan knække der.
Okay.
Jamen jeg kan slet ikke stå for det. Så lavede han et spil, der hedder Voices in My Head, som vist nok handler om en retssag, man har inde i sit eget hoved. Det synes jeg lyder lidt mærkeligt. Det har jeg ikke lige dykket så meget ned i.
Nej.
Men Unexpected, det kan man godt
vi holder øje med det. Og det lyder der om ikke andet, som han i hvert fald har sluppet de kreative kræfter løs efter at gået solo. Der er ikke noget, hvor han på nogen måde er hæmmet af, at det skal passe ind i...
Hæmmet af en mærkelig licens.
Nej, præcis. Nej, nå. Men skal vi ikke høre Bo's interview med total kreativ og altiders designer Corey Konieczka?
Lad os gøre det.
Corey, could you perhaps start just by telling me, like, who are you? Where do you live? How old are you?
A little bit about myself. My name is Corey Konieczka. I've been a professional board game designer for about the last 15 years or so. I'm 40 years old myself, and I've been, playing board games as far back as I can remember. Perhaps most well known for designing games for Fantasy Flight Games.
Yeah.
I was designing games there for the majority of my career up until 2019.
Yeah.
That I spun off to create my own studio here, and just been making games because it's my passion and I love doing it.
Have you played ever since you was a kid? I'm guessing you have, but is there a story like going all the way back?
Sure. We always had board games around the house as kids, and I've got two brothers. I've got an older brother and a younger brother. And we would play games together. Sometimes, like the whole family, we would play something, or sometimes just us, the kids. Two games in particular stand out from my childhood. The first one was Hero Quest.
Yeah.
I remember getting that for, I don't know if it was a birthday or Christmas or what it was, but me and my brother got really into that. My younger brother, we played that game to death. And the second game that I have fond memories of is Sid Sackson's Acquire.
Yeah.
And the reason why that stands out to me is that I feel like it was one of the first kind of hobby style games that I remember playing when I was younger. So, we had all the staple games. We had like Monopoly and Risk and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But my dad had a copy of the original Acquire, the 3M bookcase version. Or bookshelf version.
It's from 63 or 4 or something like that, yeah?
Yeah. He still has that copy. And that was one of those games that when it was my chance to like pick a game for the night, I'd be like, Dad, can we play that one? He'd be like, okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily terribly good at it, but it was so different than all the other things that we played. It really resonated with me.
Yeah. I actually have a copy of that.
That really old version of it?
Yeah.
Nice.
There's a little like a little room in my collection of board games for these older ones, like a first edition of Dracula these old, like, more or less Games Workshop games, all of them, I guess.
Sure.
But yeah, so two brothers and a lot of Hero Quest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that always stuck with me, even at a young age, was that we were always like making up our own rules, making up our own games, whether it was we would want more quests for Hero Quest or more items, or we would, I remember my older brother like designing like a rudimentary board game with like a maze that you were moving around. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So we started kind of just designing our own stuff just as kids. I designed like some Star Trek Fleet Battles game when I was probably, I don't know, like 10 years old or younger, and we would play that. And it was just something we always did. It was just, find a way to entertain ourselves. We had we had games, but we had fun making our own stuff too.
Reusing the components.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Steal some dice from here and throw them into there and draw something on graph paper.
And how did it happen that you ended up with Fantasy Flight Games?
Sure. So, I mean, even as I grew older, I kept playing games, and I.
How old were you when you joined Fantasy Flight? I mean, if you're 40 now.
Yes. So it was 15 years ago. So yeah, 25. Okay. Yeah. Right. Or maybe 24.
Ish. Yeah.
So, I mean, I even continued to like design games just as a hobby with my friends. I remember in high school, or middle school, when like Magic the Gathering came out, like we started playing that. And then like a friend of mine started designing like his own CCG, and we started just like drawing like cards on index cards. And I still have that game today. That every once in a while I'll break out with my friends, and it's just like giant stack of index cards that we just kept adding cards to of crazy stuff. And I never thought that we never tried to sell that or anything. But it was just, I don't know, it's just something I kept doing as I grew older. I went to college. I thought that I wanted to make video games. Yeah. So I went to school for computer science, and I did that for about a year and a half. And I left. I'm like, no, I can't do this. I'm going to spend my life programming bank software or something. And that's fine if that's what you want to do, but it wasn't my passion.
Yeah.
So I went back to school for graphic design, figuring I could use computers, which I liked, and I could be creative. And I got my degree in that, and I was doing graphic design at a print broker. I was doing like business cards and letterhead and stuff for a while. And that's when I saw the posting on Fantasy Flight's website that said, hey, we're looking for game designers. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I do that for fun. Yeah. I wonder if I could turn it into a career.
Why not?
And so, I still kind of made games with my friends. I'm like, hey, try out this new game that I made. And I never really thought I could turn it into a career. At the time, I actually had just bought Twilight Imperium 3rd edition. Yeah. And me and a friend of mine, we were making like some optional rules for Twilight Imperium. We were like adding new objectives and different sorts of stuff. And I posted it on Board Game Geek and whatnot. And then I saw this job posting. I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I applied to the job, and I sent in kind of my home-brewed expansion to Twilight Imperium. Wow. I said, here's something I've been working on. I had no idea that the creator of Twilight Imperium would actually be the one reading my resume and critiquing it. I might not have sent it if I had known that would be the case. But apparently it didn't scare him off. I didn't hear back for like a month, maybe 2 months. I just figured that I hadn't gotten a call back. And then out of the blue, I got a call and said, hey, we'd like to fly you out to Minnesota for an interview. And I was like, what? Really? What? That's awesome. So rest is history, I guess.
It became history, yeah. Was that Christian Peterson?
Yes. Yeah. So there was him, and Greg Benage was kind of the board game manager below him. That was the one that called me. And so they were both kind of in my interview, asking me questions and grilling me over my ambitions and all that fun stuff.
Great. So what's it? I mean, what do you do the first day when you're hired as a game designer? Was it kind of already in the interview, sort of, okay, so we would like you to come up with things, or was it even you pitching, why don't we do this or that, or how does that
Oh, it's definitely not me pitching. I mean, it was years before I was able to pitch my own game.
Right.
So the first thing that I did, first day on the job at Fantasy Flight Games, they were working on the World of Warcraft board game.
Right.
And there was maybe a couple of months, like 2 months left in development. So like the core game was designed, the rule book was written. They were doing like layout and stuff, still getting some artwork. And they said, all right, well, we need to design more bosses. We need to design more equipment for this game. And so that was kind of my first job, was like designing cards for the World of Warcraft board game. Yeah. So my first credit was in a World of Warcraft game, and I was over the moon. It was awesome. But I just remember sitting there at my desk, just rolling piles of D8s and like looking, like doing fake battles. Yeah, yeah. That's too powerful. Let's tweak that.
Yeah, let's turn down that.
Okay, that's about right. And then me and I was working with John Goodenough, one of the other designers at the time. And so he was designing one thing, I was designing other things. And then once we were kind of in the same place, we're like, okay, well, let's try actually playing. Sort of like print out cards, cut them out, and go down to the break room and roll out a map and try playing a game and see if what we had made worked or not.
Well, actually, Corey, that's a beautiful segue into something that I want to ask you about, because I think it's fair to say that you have created some complex games.
Yeah.
And I would like to talk to you a bit about like balancing games from a designing perspective. I can easily imagine, and I sort of love the image of you rolling D8s, trying to see, okay, so how bizarre or, how overpowered is this or that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've played quite a few of your games, and one thing that I was thinking of just last week was Imperial Assault. How do you even begin to balance a game like that? Mm-hmm. Is it a miracle that it works, or is it quite designed to do just what it does? Or how can you, I can somewhat understand that you can create a base game, but then when all these kinds of expansion comes out, new characters, and you can do this or that, mm-hmm. Is there even like a spreadsheet way of approaching that, or is it more luck, or how would you describe it?
Sure. When it comes to balancing a game, it's tricky.
Yeah.
Because especially when you're working on the base game and not an expansion, you don't fully have a game yet.
Right.
And so you don't necessarily know if anything's overpowered or underpowered. And so up until close to the end, it's difficult to have like what levers you have to push and pull on.
Sure.
When you're making an expansion, you have kind of the past that you can compare to. Like, well, I can't design this card because it's obviously just that same exact card that already exists, but better.
Yeah.
Or it's this character, but worse.
So why wouldn't you? Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just pick that character? And so the base game, you're kind of setting what the baseline is going to be. What's the average power level? And some of that you can try to balance in like spreadsheets and stuff as a starting point.
Yeah.
Like if you've got some sort of resource system, you can say, all right, here's how much a resource is worth for your attack or your defense or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then you can have like a starting point, but it's never that easy. You might use that for like your first prototype, but then it's just playtesting. You're just playing with people, and some people are like, oh, that card's too good. And so you might make it a slightly weaker in the next iteration, or they say that card's too weak. So, right before this meeting, I was in a file with a bunch of cards, going through some notes from my last playtest. And then the list was basically, this card's too weak, make it more interesting. This card's too powerful, make it more balanced against these other cards.
Yeah.
And so it's just iteration. It's just play it. And then after I've played it with my friends and my coworkers or whoever a gazillion times, then we send it out to our external playtesters.
Yeah.
And they're going to have their own perspectives. They're going to have their own strategies. And hopefully they find things that we never thought of, combinations of things that we hadn't tried.
Yeah.
Or some of it's perception too. Sometimes people will look at a card in a game and they'll be like, oh, this is super weak. And then one player's like, is it though? And they try to use it. And it turns out that it's actually really good and everyone starts using it.
You were just looking at it in the wrong light or in the wrong, the wrong way.
Yeah. And so we just try to get as many perspectives as possible.
Yeah.
At Fantasy Flight Games, we had a kind of the final step during the game development process was what we called card council. And it could be for a board game or for a card game. So we did this for like Star Wars Destiny, but we also did it for games like Twilight, Imperium 4th Edition.
Yeah.
And what you do is you get all the developers who worked on the game, and maybe even some developers that didn't work on the game, and they just know the game and played it.
Yeah.
You get them in a room together for like 2 days, maybe for a week for a giant game like Twilight Imperium. And we would go through every single card in the game. We'd put it up on the TV screen in the conference room, and we would all read the card on the screen. We'd say, does that look good? Yeah, that's okay. And then we'd go to the next card, and then someone would say, but have we considered that this might be an issue because of the wording on this. And we're like, that's a good point. Let's go back and revise that. And I mean, very time consuming when a game has like 500 cards in it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But it's kind of just that last sanity check to make sure that all those little tweaks and stuff we made during playtesting didn't accidentally break something.
Yeah. I was thinking, like, I can see you wearing a Star Wars t-shirt right now. And like working in those IPs, I'm guessing that you get some strength levels or some, like, okay, we have these known characters. If Darth Vader does this or if Palpatine does that, then we can't create something that surpasses that, because within the IP they have to be sort of the maximum, evilness. Or if something is a hard hit, then it can't really surpass this or that in raw numbers.
Exactly. I mean, when you look at something, you use the example of Darth Vader. Like, I mean, people not only expect him to be like the most powerful, single character in the game. Like, if he's not, you're kind of breaking the IP a little bit, right?
Exactly.
Because they've already established that. We can't change that.
Yeah. And how can you talk us like through what is it like working within these IPs? After you'd made the card council, would that then get through some sort of iterations from Disney? Like, would they go into those kind of numbers, or was that?
That's fair. I mean, when we were working with a licensor, whether it's Lucasfilm or I don't know, trying to think of the other licensors we work with when we're working on Battlestar Galactica, any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I was about to say Lovecraft, but that probably isn't like that's
not so much. No, StarCraft would be another example. For the most part, licensors don't get into the nuts and bolts of the game design because they don't know it as well as we do, and they asked us to make the game because we're kind of the experts in designing board games,
presumably.
And they'll give us guidance, but the thing that they usually care about and the things that they will usually approve will be the story. So they'll read like flavor text on stuff. They will look and approve artwork. They'll make sure that everything kind of looks right in the IP,
right?
But at the end of the day, the trust has to be there that we're going to like follow their guidelines, and we're going to make sure that the gameplay reflects what they want. Now, we do play it with them,
right?
Like I would fly out to Lucasfilm or Blizzard, and I would sit down in a room with the developers or the licensing team, and I'd say, "All right, we're going to play this game now," and I would teach them how to play. I remember Battlestar Galactica. I was sitting in a room with some of there was like a producer for the show and some people from NBC Universal, and none of them were board gamers. They brought like one person in the room that's like, he's an intern, he plays board games, so we're gonna bring him in with us.
Make this guy happy. Yeah.
And they're like, so is this like Monopoly? I'm like, no, it's not. But I walked them through it, and even though they weren't necessarily experienced with playing the game, we framed it in such a way that they were like, they could see how the theme of the show interacted.
Yeah.
And I mean, Battlestar was a great example where I would say, all right, you decide to be President Roslin. You now have the choice of whether you are going to arrest or I guess that would be, you're the admiral. You have the choice of whether you want to institute martial law and arrest the president. And the president's like, ooh, yes, this is very interesting. Or I remember in that particular game, the lady that was the admiral, she had one nuke left, and there was a base star. And I'm like, all right, well, you could launch your last nuke on this turn, but you won't have any more left for the rest of the day. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. So she launches the nuke and completely misses. Turns out that she was a Cylon. She was just trying to waste all of the resources. And she felt really good about it. I'm like, hey, good job. And that's ultimately, they just want, a licensor just wants you to be true to their brand.
Yeah.
And if you're enthusiastic about it and you're showing them that you love it and you understand it, then you can kind of build that trust that you're going to make it correct.
But your list, Corey, of IPs is like tremendous, right? It's you mentioned World of Warcraft. We have, of course, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica. You've made some amazing Cthulhu games. Have you? I mean, I'm guessing games become better when you love the universe that they play in, right? You.
Oh yes.
Have you ever worked on something that you really didn't care about, or like, yeah, okay, it's a game, but I'd rather set this in a different setting?
Sure. I mean, so some games that I worked on, I was more excited about the IP than others. Like I'm a huge sci-fi fan, so you hear me talking about Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, and StarCraft, and all these things. And I love horror stuff too. So all of the Cthulhu things, and yeah, there were some things that I was maybe less excited about. Like for example, I was asked to design one of the expansions for the Game of Thrones board game. It was the second or third expansion, Storm of Swords.
Yeah.
And I had never read any of the books.
No, it was just like fantasy stuff.
You're a designer. You get to know this IP and design an expansion for it. I'm like, okay. So I went home with a stack of books, and a couple of weeks later, I was just chopping away, designing an expansion, and I think it turned out well. And
absolutely, to
be fair, we had a lot of people around the office that knew Game of Thrones inside and out, and so I relied on them a lot to kind of steer some of that thematic stuff. And it was the third expansion, so at that point, it'd be a little difficult for me to mess it up, I think.
Right. Tell us a bit about your love of the horror genre, and any particular like horror designs or horror games that stands out to you. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I like weird, like supernatural type stories. That's always been something that's been fascinating to me. I'm less into kind of the really like slasher gore type horror films. I like the more kind of intellectual ones, the more like
with a twist,
Sixth Sense and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, Lovecraft is such an interesting like IP. I got to work on a bunch of things in the Arkham line, from like Elder Torah to Mansion of Madness.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of my chance to kind of channel some of that passion. And I mean, one of the things that stands out with those games is the way that it handles sanity.
Yeah.
And that you have kind of 2 health resources. And that dates back to like the Call of Cthulhu RPG back in the day. But I remember playing, there was this video game for GameCube back in the day called Eternal Darkness. Very obscure game, but it really stuck with me because it was the first game I ever played where you had a health bar and a sanity bar.
Yeah, okay.
And as you started running out of sanity, the game would start to mess with you.
Right.
Like it would, if you ran out of sanity, like all of a sudden, like your screen would like look like it turned off, and you're like, "What? I lost power. I didn't save it. What the heck's going on?" But it didn't actually turn off. It just pretended it did.
Right.
And so it do all these like crazy things to mess with you, and that really like stuck with me.
Yeah.
And I was like, "That's really cool." And so when I got a chance to work on Lovecraft games, I definitely wanted to channel some of that stuff. So Elder Torah was, I think, maybe the first one I got to work on. That was like, I really loved Arkham Horror 2nd Edition by Kevin Wilson, Richard Lanius. Like that game was amazing. It really opened my eyes the first time I played that. I'm like, whoa. And I was asked to kind of take their game design and turn it into like a globe spanning version of that.
Yeah.
And so I was in the fortunate spot where I could borrow all of the best parts of their game design, add in kind of the things that I wanted, and that's the game. That's pretty much where it came from.
You mentioned like other designers, and I can see like from the box art of a lot of the games that you've worked on that other people have been involved as well. Do you typically play like the same role on this kind of teamwork, or have you been paired up with other people through Fantasy Flight? Or tell us a bit about co-creation.
Sure. I mean, it would vary. So I would say one example would be some of the games that I co-created with Christian Peterson. He would come up with some ideas for some mechanics. Mm-hmm. So StarCraft, the board game, he's like, all right, I like the idea of a StarCraft game where it spans multiple planets and instead of just being a single battle that you're playing.
Right.
And he also liked the idea of, well, what if we took the order tokens from Game of Thrones, and instead of placing them on regions, you actually like place them in stacks.
Yeah.
And then you resolve them going down the stack. And so that was basically like the two mechanics that he designed.
Yeah.
And he said, all right, use those mechanics in a StarCraft game.
Okay.
And I said, okay. And so I went and I kind of added like the fact that each faction has a deck, and as you buy technologies, you shuffle them into your deck, and so it's kind of like a deck building thing before they're deck builders.
Yeah.
And then there were other games like Eldritch Horror, where I actually had kind of two elements of the co-creation of. First, it was Richard Lanius and Kevin Wilson who made the previous edition of the game, and so it was like I borrowed mechanics from them, and then Nikki Valens had just started at FFG, and so kind of the way that when I started, I went to help out on World of Warcraft. She went to help out on Eldritch Horror.
All right.
And so I was maybe halfway through development of that game, and she came on board, and it was great to get like a fresh perspective. She asked me a lot of questions like, oh, do we really need this mechanic? Like this part seems a little bit too complex. Before she started, we actually had money tokens in the game, like Arkham Horror 2nd Edition had. And she was like, is there a way that we can remove that? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I think she came up with the idea of like, what if whenever you went shopping, instead it was testing your influence instead of actually spending money?
Right.
Because in a game where you're traveling the globe, like, what do you have like a briefcase of like 50 different types of cash in there? Like, how does it work? And so those are, I think, the three examples of the different types of collaborations I've done with people.
Yeah. And do you enjoy that, or you have created some games like from the ground up yourself, and you have co-created with other people? But what is there pros and cons?
I mean, when you've got a team of people, it can be difficult to make everybody happy, right?
Sure.
You get the saying goes, you have too many chefs in the kitchen. Everybody wants it to taste differently. And so you end up with something that's just kind of bland. It doesn't make anybody happy. And I mean, that's always a danger, but I think I was pretty fortunate in the kind of collaborations where I was able to contribute in a meaningful way. Twilight Imperium 4th edition is another great example where, so it was a previous edition of a game from Christian. Dane Beltrami was actually the head developer on it, and I was just kind of the executive game designer for the studio at the time. So I wasn't actually working directly on the game, but I had worked on the expansions for 3rd edition. I knew the game inside and out. I kind of knew what Christian wanted from a new edition of the game. And so my job was more of like steering the direction from like a high level while he was doing all the detail work. And there were a couple of like specific mechanics that I added to the new edition, like what was it? Oh, the way that the faction sheets are. And in 3rd edition, there was a lot of math whenever you went into battle. You're like, oh, this ability gives me +1, this one gives me +1, so I've got +2 to my roll. And I was thinking there could be a visual way that we could represent upgrades without having to like constantly be adding stuff up and sometimes overlooking things. And so that was one of my main contributions to the new edition. And I mean, it's all fun. I don't necessarily prefer one more than the others. It's a little weird in my position now because I'm basically a one-person studio. And so I do all the design and development work myself. I play with a ton of people. I've got a ton of play testers. I still have, I'll even sometimes play test with some people at FFG and various things, but it's all the pressure falls on me. And so it's
sure.
It can be more stressful that way.
I'm sure. So tell us about you broke away from Fantasy Flight. I actually remember like reading that press release and going, "Whoa, Corey is leaving Fantasy Flight Games." What are you up to now? And give us a bit insight on Unexpected Games. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, when I left FFG, like there was no bad blood between us. I've been there for a long time, and I just felt like a change. I had made a lot of FFG style games. I had basically notebooks full of ideas for games that just weren't a good fit for FFG.
Right.
So I talked to my boss and I said, "Hey, what do you think of me starting up a new studio that focuses on kind of innovative, kind of out of the box, kind of crazy ideas? And he said yes. So I kind of spun off into my own studio.
Yeah.
I moved halfway across the country. So I moved to Minnesota to work at FFG. But part of the reason to do this was I wanted to return back to the East Coast where all my family was. And so that was great. So we moved back here. And my goal with Unexpected Games is I want to be making games that aren't going to replace something that's already on your shelf. Like, you probably already have a favorite dungeon crawl, right? I'm never going to be able to usurp that. And there are 100 other people trying to let them try. But I think that there's a lot of space out there for just fresh experiences that haven't been made yet.
Yeah.
And so the goal for our studio is to do games that we want people to remember, we want people to talk about, and that stand out, because thousands of new games come out every year.
Yeah.
And how do you make people pay attention?
Yeah.
And I think the best way to do that is do something different, do something that people are going to talk about, do something that a game where people play it and then they're going to go home and they're going to tell their friends about it because it was so, like, it just stuck with them because it was so different.
Yeah.
I think honestly, one of the key drivers of just being a human being is like trying to like have fresh experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you do it right, you can capture kind of that same childlike wonder you had when you played Hero Quest for the first time, where you had never seen anything like that before. You're like, whoa. I mean,
is that even possible?
Is that possible? It's a tall order. It's daunting.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a shelf full of prototypes that I threw together here that I'm like, this sounds interesting. This sounds different.
Yeah.
And I mock something up, but I play it and I'm like, yeah, that was different. It wasn't any fun though. Let's try something else.
Yeah.
So we've released 2 games so far, and I feel like they both have established kind of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
The first game was The Initiative. Yeah. You got a copy of it there? Nice.
I picked this one up last week just because I was about to talk to you now. So I'm looking very much forward to it. I haven't had it on the table just yet, but can you, now that I have bought it, perhaps I can get you to tell me what is it that I've bought?
So it's a game of 3 layers, and that's kind of the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
So the first layer is the story, and the story is that it takes place in the mid-90s. There's 4 teenagers that find a board game at a yard sale. As they start to play it, they realize that it's kind of mysteriously connected to their lives.
Okay.
And they're trying to figure out what the heck is this weird game that we just bought. The unique thing about that is the story itself is told in comic book form.
Yeah.
So we actually have a 48-page comic book in the box. And before each mission, you read a page of the comic. It shows what the kids are up to in their daily lives, how the game ties into it. And then you actually sit down and you play the board game that they bought at the yard sale.
Right.
And so this game, it's like a found game at a yard sale. So there's like, in the rule book, there's like strange messages written in the margins from the previous owner of the game.
Yeah.
There's some components that aren't even described because there's like maybe a page missing or something missing from the rules. There's many layers of mystery to that like found game. And kind of as you play through it, you kind of unravel more answers to like what this game is.
Right. Have that idea like been with you for a long time, and you sort of had to go out as an independent game studio to, sort of force yourself through creating that? Or yeah,
that's a game that's just been kind of noodling in the back of my mind for years and years.
I can almost hear it when you describe it. Yeah.
And yeah, I think the biggest inspiration was there was this book by J.J. Abrams and somebody Dorst that's called S, The Ship of Theseus. And it's this book that looks like a book that was stolen from a library. It has like a sticker on the outside of it and stuff.
Right.
And inside the book, There's all these things like inserted into the pages. There's all of these notes written in the margins from the people checking out the book, and they're having discussions with each other, like talking about the mysterious author of the book in the margins. It's totally fascinating.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a main inspiration for the game. And so like I had kind of those two levels in my head, and then I had to figure out, well, what is the game? Like, what are you actually doing? Right.
Yeah.
And so the third layer of the game is the actual gameplay. And it's kind of my love letter to code breaking and cryptography.
Yeah.
It's a game where you're playing as these spies that are recovering like pieces of a cipher, and you're kind of traveling around in these dangerous places to basically crack codes.
Right.
But unlike a pure deduction game or a pure like escape room game like Unlock or something, there's strategy to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just solve the puzzle. It is, all right, there's also card play involved, that you need to work together to play your cards in the right order so that you can get around the board, so that you can evade traps and collect the tokens, so that you can have enough information to solve the code. So what we found was that it actually appeals to people who like puzzle solving, but it also appeals to people who don't necessarily like that. So like one of my playtesters was saying, he's like, I'm not really into like those Unlock and those puzzle solving games, but the rest of my group is.
Yeah.
But that's fine, because I could focus on the strategy aspect, and I could strategize like the best way to get around the board. And they could focus on the code breaking and the puzzle solving.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of unique in that most games kind of sit in one camp or the other. They're either a strategy game or a puzzle solving game. You don't usually see both.
Corey, one thing stands out talking to you is that you're a man of like many melodies, right? I think I have other like designers where when they come out with a new game, in all the right ways, I intend to say this as a compliment, but other designers where you would sort of know, right, this or this guy have come out with a new game, then we already know what it's like, right? It's okay, so he has probably refined this or that mechanic. We are now about to see, something more in this or this regard. And as a compliment, I don't think that's possible with your games. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've made kind of a pretty broad library of games.
It's not the same settings, like it's not the same mechanics. It's not the same experiences necessarily. And
sure,
I think that's impressive in the intention, in the most intense sense of the word. That's impressive.
Thank you. I mean, I think it just comes with like, I don't want to be complacent, but I also like don't want to retread old ground. Like I am always excited by new stuff, but I'm also my tastes have changed over the years. I mean, I've got a kid now, and so I'm playing different sorts of games when I'm playing games with the family. I don't necessarily have 8 hours to sit down and play Twilight Imperium.
I played Star Wars Rebellion last week.
Oh, I'm jealous. That's when people ask me the question of what's one game of yours that if one of your friends said, hey, I want to play one of your games, which one would you jump at the opportunity to play? And it would be Star Wars Rebellion.
Yeah.
It's weird making games because oftentimes you don't actually play the game that came out.
Yeah.
And by then I've played the game 100 times. It's like, oh, I'm so sick of playing this game.
Yeah.
I love it, but I know it like inside and out. And so the second game for our studio is very different. And that just came out earlier this year. It's called Voices in My Head.
Yeah.
And it was important with our second game to not just make another cooperative puzzle solving game with a campaign. Like if we had done something that was very similar to the initiative, then I think we would have labeled ourselves as, oh, it's the studio that does this type of game.
Typecasting thing, yeah.
Yes. And so this game, it's a competitive game. And the story is that a man has robbed a bank and he is on trial for robbing that bank.
Right. Rightfully, right.
We all know that he did it. But the prosecutor, so one of the players is the prosecutor, and they need to prove that he did it. So they need to convince the jurors that this man is guilty. All the other players play as the different emotions that live inside him that are kind of pushing and pulling him.
Right.
So it's kind of like the movie Inside Out that Pixar did. One player might be honesty. And so you've got a secret goal, and your goal is you want him to tell the truth. So he has to tell the truth enough to convince so many jurors that he did commit the crime. Somebody else might be selfishness, and their goal is like, no matter what happens, don't go to jail. And somebody else might be doubt, and they're like, well, I'm not quite sure. Just, that sense that everybody has inside them, the war of conscience that I imagine anybody would feel if they were on trial for a crime, right?
Yeah.
Or most people would feel, maybe not a psychopath. I can't speak for them.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
But it's a game about kind of the personal internal struggle that I think all people would go through in that experience. It's told in kind of a very fun way. It doesn't take itself super seriously. Really crazy things can happen in the trial. And there's a unique mechanic where in the center of the board is actually Guy's brain. And there are different regions of his brain. There's the motor skills, the speech region, the observation region. And you're placing tokens on the board to try to take over these regions. So if I have control of the speech region, it means that anytime the prosecutor asks me a question asks Guy a question on the stand, I'm the one who gets to answer the question because I have the control of speech. And somebody else might see what I say while I'm on the stand. They're like, whoa, hold on a second, hold on. And so now they're going to try to take speech away from me because they certainly don't want me opening my mouth again.
Right.
That would be a disaster for their strategy. And so it's got this interesting kind of three-dimensional board where you're pushing these tokens into regions and kind of knocking other tokens off. It's not necessarily like a dexterity. You're not like flicking or anything. It's just a spatial kind of puzzle.
Okay.
That's very fun. And like I said, just crazy stuff can happen on the trial. We have on our website, there's a mock trial that you can actually like play through like a choose your own adventure to get a taste of what the game might feel like.
Okay.
And it's just, I play games to have fun. And I feel like this is just like a game that when you play with your friends, you're going to have fun. You're going to be laughing about it. You're going to be talking about it. And you're going to walk away with like a fun story and just have a good time.
But living off what you do, I totally get what you're saying. Like we need to be able to walk away from the table, the play table, remembering, like we also need to, in a very physical way, infect other people with the hobby, right? We need to continuously be ambassadors for what all this board game stuff does. But are you afraid, in a way, that people won't know what the next Corey game is, or is that a trademark that never feel too sure about what will he do next?
I don't know. I never think about it. Ultimately, I'm just making games that I enjoy.
Yeah,
and I just hope that other people enjoy them too. Sure, my games need to sell, right? I need to make things that are successful, but I just, like, as a person who's been designing games for so long, I feel like I can't, it's very difficult for me to retread something that I've already done. It's just not, it's very hard to be motivated to do that. And so I'm a very kind of self-motivated person. I'm a little bit of a workaholic. I'll have a play test at the end of the day, and then I'll spend like all weekend thinking about all the things that went wrong and how I can fix it. And I'm like, Corey, you're not working anymore. I was bitten by the game design bug, and I'm always thinking about it, and I'm always kind of making experiences because it's the only thing I know how to do. And I'm my harshest critic. Like, I will work on a game until I think that it's the most fun that it can be. And we do our best to then market it and sell it to people and find the right audience for it.
But rather that way around, right? Rather that the game is unique and interesting in its own terms. I think we've all seen games that have been, in a way, designed for a market that someone is pretty sure is out there somewhere.
Sure,
but we don't really know who they are, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I don't want to do is chase the next fad, right? I don't want to say, oh, this style of game is really popular right now. It's a roll and write, or it's an
escape room
deck building game. If I have a really interesting idea for a deck builder or a roll and write game, like, sure, I'll make it, but I'll make it because I'm passionate about it, not because I think that like that's the big hot thing right now and I need to make one. And like, honestly, I made a deck builder. I made Rune Age. And I made that because I played Dominion and I got really inspired. I'm like, oh, what if there was a deck building game where there were actually like different objectives and you could play different scenarios. You could play a cooperative, you could play head to head, you could play this and that and this. And that's where that game came from. I feel like games should always come from a place of passion because the players are going to realize it. They're going to feel your passion through your game.
Absolutely. Well, Corey, thank you so much for taking your time to be on Papstinenser. Thank you for telling us a bit about your amazing career and all the games that we have played. I was about to say shared, but in a way.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on here and more great things to come. I've got another game that'll hopefully be coming out this year, and then just going to keep going, making more.
Anything you can give us a little sneak peek into?
I'll tell you, our next game is going to be different than the Initiative and Voices in My Head. It'll be a competitive game. There's bluffing involved, and there's a unique hook to it. We'll be announcing it this summer, so keep your eyes peeled.
We will. Thank you so much, Corey, and keep it up.
Awesome. Thank you. It's fun.
Great.
Tak til producer Bo, og tak til Corey Konieczka, som nu har været med i Papstinenser og tilføjet den, synes jeg efterhånden, ret imponerende række af designere, vi har forbi i studiet.
Det er helt sikkert. Jeg er ret imponeret over, hvor mange der egentlig gider snakke med en lille podcast fra Danmark, men det er ret fint.
Ja, det er dejligt. Vi jager nogle flere. Og med det så er vi nået til enden af denne episode af Papstinenser. Du kan finde links til tidligere episoder, inklusive interviews med celeberfolk som Eric Lang og hvem har vel Steve Jackson. Nu har jeg så glemt, hvad hedder hun? Hvad hedder hun?
Elizabeth Hargrave.
Ja, lige præcis. Det var lige hende, jeg ledte efter. Tak, Peter. Dem kan du finde på papstinenser.dk eller på papsco.dk/podcast. Husk, at du kan støtte Papstinenser på tier.dk, så kan du være med i lodtrækningen næste gang, vi udvælger en lytter, der kan vælge indholdet af en bonusepisode. Og den seneste bonusepisode er sygt meget forsinket, og det er rimelig meget min skyld. Men jeg tror snart, jeg har den. Så skal vi nok få den optaget. Det er også en niche-podcast. Nå, men bonusepisoderne, de er gratis for alle. Hver en krone for tier bliver brugt på hosting, bedre optageudstyr og promotion af brætspil som hobby. Du kan finde Papstinenser på Apple Podcast, på Spotify, på Podimo, eller hvor du ellers henter din podcast, og så er vi på YouTube. Med mig i studiet i dag var Peter Brix. Bo Jørgensen havde snakket med Corey Konieczka, og Papstinenser er produceret af selvsamme Bo Jørgensen, af Christian Beckmann og Mike Ditlevsen. Mit navn er Christian Petersen, og på vegne af Papstinenser siger jeg tak, fordi I lyttede med.